Hey everyone, it's Andres at the Baking Steel Studio. Today we are doing making dough, having a dough hangout, answering all your questions. And we're gonna make our 72-hour dough. First things first, the flour is really important. And I wanna just dive into this a little bit. I like to use organic flour because I like organic stuff, especially in flour, because there are some flours that use like bleached. We don't want to use bleach on our flour. We want to use it naturally. So there's a few flour companies that do it great. A lot, not just a few, a bunch. My favorite, my go-to is this flour from Central Milling, high gluten flour, organic. It's got a 13.5% protein content. And we're fermenting our doughs for several days. In this case, like 2 to 3 to 4 days. You need to have a high protein flour. And this one really fits the bill. It's available online at centralmilling.com. But if you just want to go to the market, go to Whole Foods, and they have King Arthur flour, makes a great flour. They make a bread flour, an organic bread flour. I don't think it's as high of protein content as this might be, but it's in the 13s. It's great. And I love it. I prefer this one over any of the flours I've tried. And there's a bunch of micro mills everywhere spotted. Maybe there might be some near you. My recommendation is just try them. Try all different flours, blend them, do anything you can to make it your own. I just find with the higher protein, and we do these long ferments, and what happens is the glutens break down in these long ferments, so we need to have a strong flour. If I use an all-purpose flour, it's not going to be able to hold 2 or 3 days. That'd be great for maybe 1 day. But for longer fermentations, in particular, our 72-hour dough, we like to use bread flour. 00 also works. It is great. I personally prefer the bread over the 00. There's going to be a handful of people that prefer the 00 over the bread. So it's really dealer's choice. Let it roll, try them out, blend them both together. See how they hold up to the fermentation. Sometimes flours do not like a 3-day fermentation. It might be too long, and you might find yourself ripping the dough in holes. And that's because the glutens have now broken down over several days and cannot withstand that fermentation. So be mindful, try them out. I particularly love 3 and 4 days. I feel like that's the wheelhouse. I think Kenji and like Peter Reinhardt all talked about this in their books, and we're kind of reiterating what they're saying. They've done all these tests, and then ultimately 3 or 4 days is amazing. So let's get right into making. I'm going to make a batch of dough. Today's Wednesday. I'm going to make pizza on Friday night, so I want to make my dough on Tuesday or Wednesday, even Thursday. Give it a head start. The fermentation is going to help this dough color, flavor, and just add this really incredible flavor and incredible like consistency and deliciousness. It's amazing. Here's my flour. Let's get to it. I'm going to down, and we'll get to all your questions afterwards. First things first, I need a digital scale. This is a must. I need to measure all my ingredients by weight to really dial in the water to flour ratio. The only way to really do that is to measure everything in like grams, if you will, because we can dial this in. In my dough container, this is my baking steel dough container, I have 500 grams of flour already in here, okay? It's pre-measured, it's 500 grams on the button. I'm going to add in sea salt, 16 grams. And now this isn't a critical amount. It's what we love. Some people think it's a little heavy in the salt. I think it's just right. You can go anywhere from 10 to 20. You can even do more or less. It's just adding a nice flavoring agent into your dough. I've got that flour in there, and now I'm just gonna kind of shake it up a little bit in my container, or I can just whisk it. I want to blend this up like a pharmacist, just so the salt and the flour distributes evenly. Give a little shake. And this is like my bowl. I love these containers because it keeps all my ingredients inside the bowl. For my yeast, I'm going to use Fleshman's Active Dry Yeast. Now I'm going to put this aside for a second because I have a micro scale. Micro scale measures to the 1/100th of a gram. And just to show you how accurate this is, if I take one blueberry and place it on there, it's 3.37 grams. Now, if I take my general scale and zero it out, and I put my blueberry on, guess what? Oh, it's saying 4. Okay, so it's close, but it's not nearly as close as this says 3.71. So it's rounding up, if you will. I can also take a small amount of flour. Let's take a really small amount, 0.35 grams of flour. Now watch, if I put that same flour on this scale here, it's not going to even register. It's still at 0. My point is, find yourself one of these micro scales because we want to dial in the amount of yeast we put in our dough. And we use micro amounts. So I zero it out. I put my lid on there. Now I'll zero out again. Oops, sorry. 0, and I'll just add 1 gram of yeast. And you can see how small that is. In my palm, it's like a tiny, tiny amount of yeast. Put this aside, put it back in my bowl. My yeast goes in, and I just whisk it around again. My next step, I'm going to add my water. And now, again, tear out my scale and take my water and pour it in up to 350 degrees, 350 grams. Close, 345, 354, close enough. Now I can put my scale away. Here's my my mixture. And I've been doing this lately. It's kind of saving a little bit of time. I put my lid back on, and what I do, I just give this thing a little shake back and forth. It's like this, right? It's just combining my flour and water, just like that. And now what I'll do is I'm going to take my lid off, take my dough scraper, just kind of mess this around, mix it up. And now what I'll do is I'll get my hand inside of the container and just lightly press it all together. I want to form one large mass of dough. On a skill level, guys, this is made for 5th graders. A 5th grader could make this recipe. It's not difficult. The genius is measuring our ingredients. And even a 5th grader could do that because we're dialing it in. We're really particular about the amount of water, the amount of salt, the amount of, the quality of the flour, the quality of the water. Now I drink filtered water. I have a reverse osmosis in the studio here. And I cook with reverse osmosis. So I drink it that way. So everything I make, even if I'm boiling pasta water, I use reverse osmosis water just because I love it. And you can see I've got one mass of dough here, right? And I could do this a couple of ways. I could clean out my container, right? Boom, press all that in there. Put my dough back inside. Take my lid. Oh wow, this has got some flour on it. Let me clean this off first. Take my lid, close her up, boom. And I'll take my my container, and now it's all mixed up. I'm gonna let that sit on the counter for 24 hours. 24 hours at room temperature. And to me, room temperature is about 70 degrees. It's getting cold. So this is not my home, this is my studio. So I generally cool it down a little bit in here, like in the 60s. So what I do, if I know it's gonna be cool at night, is I'll take my container and just stick this in my oven. I'll stick this in my oven because it's gonna be a little bit warmer in there, probably around 68 to 72 degrees overnight. That's what I did this morning. And I made a batch of dough. So I did this yesterday, and now I've got dough. Let's fast track what we'll do. After 1 day, this is going in the fridge for 2 more days, 1 to 3 more days to say. So if it's Friday night, it might sit in the fridge for 1 night of a 48-hour dough. Saturday night, it would be a 72-hour dough. So let's fast track to Saturday. About 3 hours, 4 hours tops before I make my pizza, I'm going to take the dough out of the fridge. And then what I'm going to do is divide it up and place it down on my countertop, just like that. And now what I'll do is take some flour, dust it, get my scale back over here, right? And I'm going to make my portions. So this made, depending on how much I want to make, this will make, 3, 4, 5 pizzas, however I want to measure them out. I'm going to measure about 250 grams. That's the size I love. I kind of put it on my scale. It's 224, 246, close enough, right? So I'm going to make all my portions. I'll get a couple here for us. 240, it's close enough. One more here. Sorry for that sound. 240. So I got 3 portions here, say, right? I'm gonna make 3 pizzas. What I'll do is I'll take my hands, flour my hands up, nice, right? Just like this. Coat my dough inside this flour. You see, I've got that little piece I cut out there. I'm gonna fold that right into it. It's gonna be fine. Next, what I'll do is I'm gonna take this dough and just fold it in half. And I'm gonna turn my hands. I'm going to press it in again. I'm going to give you a different view in a second, and then close, and then turn. Press, close, and turn. Just like this. If this gets sticky at all, flour up your hands, just like this, right? Flour up the dough if you want. I'm going to press, turn. Press in, and turn, and close. My next dough ball, I'll do a different version, a different view for you. But you can see I'm not pressing in heavy, very lightly, and turn. Each time I do this, I'm losing a little bit of air inside this ball, and it's going to be becoming more and more taut. These are the gluten strands. You can see it's still very smooth. It's not sticking to my hands at all. Press and close and turn. Press, close, and turn. And I do this about 30 times. Ultimately, once I get it really smooth and taut, I'll put the smooth side in my palm. I'm going to take this seam now and just kind of really, I can be aggressive and close it up. And I've got this beautiful dough ball. I'm going to do another one for you guys with this view, but here's that one here. I will place this back inside my dough container and cover it up. Let's take another one. I'm going to flour up my hands. You can see here, flour it up. And now I'll take it and fold it in half like this, and then turn my hands. Oh, it's getting a little stuck there. I don't want that. So I'm going to take my hands, get more flour on them. And then I'm going to press inside and then close and then turn. Each time I'll grab a side, press in and close and turn. Each time I do this, it's getting more and more taut. We get more flour. It's getting a little sticky. That's okay. And close. And turn. Press my fingers in, close, and turn. I'm not going in heavy. If you can see my hands, I'm very, very gentle, gently going in and close, and then turn. I grab each side like this, press it in, close, and turn. You see my seam side is always facing away from me, and the smooth side is always facing my chest. That way I just follow the same sequence 30, 35 times. I'm not even counting, but I can feel it getting more and more taut. You can see how smooth the side is here, right? Again, it gets sticky. Just put it in your palms, put some flour on there. My hands are pretty clean, right? Just flour. I don't want this. I don't want these gluten sticking to my hands. Then it starts to rip these gluten strands. I don't want that. Not the end of the world. However, that's my goal. Smooth side now can go in my palm, and now I'm going to be aggressive and just close this, pinch this off here. You can see I've got a dough ball. I place it next to my other one. I'll put these back in my dough container, cover them up, and I will let those rest for 3 or 4 hours covered. That is called the final proof. And we love to do it the day of pizza making so we can really dial in that time. And so if I'm making pizza at 7, it's important. I want to impress my guests, right? Or my family. I want to make my dough balls between like 3 and 4 o'clock, because that's going to help these glutens relax, those strands, the glutens. And then we close this off. So all the natural gases now are going to try to escape, which is going to help this dough kind of expand and grow. And that is also going to help us, after 3 hours, stretch this dough out like it's a piece of pizza dough that's gone through a yoga class, and it's going to be super supple and easy to stretch. That's where the genius is. If we wait those 3 or 4 hours, the dough is so much more supple and beautiful to work. If you buy store-bought dough, here's a trick. Take it out of those bags and divide it into 2 pieces. They're usually about 1 pound in those bags. Ball it up just like we did. Let those stretch. Let those relax for 3 or 4 hours again. Even the store-bought dough, if you're using Trader Joe's or Whole Foods or just your local market, after 3 or 4 hours, after we ball it up, those gluten start to relax. It'll stretch beautifully versus like fighting it. Like it comes in those bags like this and we're fighting it. It's cold. It just does not work. So we let the dough rest after we ball it up, and it's a game changer. Preferably make your own. Let's get to some questions, you guys. That's it. Okay. What is the difference between double zero flour and more? So the difference, the double zero flour it's a different version. It's made in Italy. They sift it differently. I think it's a finer grain of flour. They also it's really made, I think ideally they make it for higher temperature ovens, like that, like an uni or a wood-fired oven or a Gosney. Those higher temp people tend to like them for those like 900-degree ovens. Personally, I like it. I just love this flour. That's really, again, and it's a dealer's choice. Well, adding what is considered a long fermentation? I think anything over 24 hours would be considered long. If I'm using all-purpose flour, I'm only using a 24-hour fermentation. If I'm using this bread flour, I can go 4 days, sometimes even 5 days. In fact, I made dough. You can see inside of here. This dough was made last Friday. And what is today? I made it Thursday. Today's Wednesday. So I made this dough literally like 5 or 6 days ago. And I didn't make pizza. So I decided this morning, take it out of my container, make a big ball of dough, let it rest in here for an hour or 2. I'm going to make this as bread after class today. It's going to be phenomenal. It'll be great. So there's always a use for it. And that's going to have like 5 or 6 days of flavor inside. It's going to be next level great. Will adding oil to the dough make a difference? Yes. The time when you would, like, let's say I just mixed this dough and kneaded it for 2 or 3 minutes, it's formed one massive ball. Now is the time, if I'm using oil, I'm going to add oil after I knead it. The reason is now the oil is going to seep in, like kind of bleed in through those gluten strands inside the dough, and it's going to coat them slightly and give this dough a little different texture when we bite into it. It's micro, it's not a huge difference, but you can taste the oil, and like a New York pizza might have oil in the dough. Just a subtle difference. It's awesome. Not my preference, but like we use oil in our English muffins, and because I like that bite it brings inside of the dough. My dough always seems sticky and it starts to rip as I'm balling. Does my mix need more water or flour or longer ferment? Really great question. Is this when I'm balling up, my dough starts to rip as I'm balling? Yes. When I made these dough balls, my hands are pretty clean. Like I've got some dough stuck on here. It's really important that we overdo it. Like if I'm just starting out, like, I mean, coat them with flour. You do not want the dough to stick. Now, it's going to take practice. It's going to take, even, this is not a beginner's dough. This is 70% hydrated dough. It's got a lot of water inside of it. So it's going to be sticky. In order to combat that, use flour. Coat the dough in flour first, then coat your hands. And as it gets stuck, stop what you're doing, put more flour on your hands. I can't say that, I can't stress that enough. More flour is not going to alter the recipe much. Don't worry about that. We want to just master making those dough balls first without it sticking. So more flour. That's my recommendation. I used the puffy pizza recipe, let it ferment for 3 days, and the dough turned out to be too wet. What did I do wrong? Really great question. The puffy pizza recipe is awesome. It is made without a digital scale, and it was designed for people that don't have a scale but want to try making pizza. When not using a scale, it is really difficult to dial in the flour to water ratio. The best way we could do it, and we did some experiments with it. I took a measuring cup and made really small batches, but this is 1 cup. I used 2 cups of flour and 1 cup of water. I measured this out on a scale. It turns out to be about a 63-64% hydration. But when people scoop out flour, right? Some people are going to have a heaping flour. Sometimes it's going to sit in there, the air pockets a little bit more. It's not super accurate. My only advice would be, if you're making this, if it feels like it's too wet, then just add a little bit more flour inside of it. Kind of wing it, like eyeball it. Just add a little bit at a time until it feels like the consistency that you want. It takes practice. No joke, it does take practice, but you can dial it in. It's a really cool recipe and fun to make. However, it's not going to be super accurate. So it's going to take some finesse. Will you post a photo of the bread you baked today on Facebook? I would love to see it. Yeah, hey, Vicky. In fact, I just posted this. I did the same thing like 2 days ago on Instagram. I'll post it if I don't get a picture to this tonight of what I did. It's phenomenal. It's like incredible bread. Super easy. I do it because my kids and my family, we just love eating bread. And I bring it home. It's been fermenting for 4 or 5 days. So much flavor. The glutens aren't strong, so we digest this really easy. If you've been to Europe, you know, this is kind of what they do. They use organic flours. They let it ferment for days, and it's super easy in our system to digest. So yeah, I'll try to get some pictures. If I do use oil on a 500-gram batch, I think it's about 20 grams, almost a tablespoon of oil in the dough afterwards. Can you refrigerate the dough balls if you only want 1 pizza? Really good question. Let's say I made 3 dough balls. Here's a great question. And I let it proof, and 3 hours go by. I make a pizza, but then, you know, suddenly we got I don't know, plans to go out, and we didn't want to make the other pizzas. Yeah, I go take these dough balls and put them right back in the fridge. Here's another secret though. If I'm going to make pizza like the next day or 2 days later, what I'll do is I'm going to reball my pizza dough up again, because what happens, it's going to start to proof. And I talked earlier today about nailing that final proof of 3 hours. When I remove the dough from the fridge, I want to ball it up again because it's overproofed at that point. It's essentially like starting over again. So 3 more hours after I reball it up, and that dough will be amazing. I do it all the time, reball doughs. In fact, I'm sure restaurants do too. Yes, I hope that answers that. Not sure how you could show the virtually, but how soft consistency should we aim for? Ritu, are you talking about your hands when you're touching the dough, or how should the dough feel? Can you clarify that a little bit? Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Final dough, the final dough feel. Okay, so if I use this dough is super supple right now. It's soft. It's not going to stretch out because the glutens are still tight because we just balled it all up, but it feels really soft to the touch. You can see it's like still pretty springy too. right? When I'm making pizza, like if I make pizza today with these dough balls and I let those dough balls like rest for 3 or 4 hours, when I go to stretch it out, it's gonna feel like a cloud. Like I've never touched a cloud. However, I think this dough feels like a cloud. It's so supple. It's so beautiful. I've done this like thousands of times and I never get tired of it. I'm always impressed by the feel of the dough after I let it ferment for a couple of days and then proof for 3 or 4 hours. It's amazing. And you'll get the same vibe, Reed, too, when you really nail that down. Hope that answers that. Does anybody else have any questions? Love to get to them. I'd like to get an area open crust. Mike, what's up? Mike, what kind of flour are you using on your dough for your dough recipe? What type of flour? Does the brand of yeast matter? Great question. Mike, I'll get back to you in a second. The brand I'm using, Fleshman's active dry yeast, and there's different types of yeast. It's like fast rise. I like this active dry. This is 4 ounces and 113 grams. So I can literally, once I open this up, make pizza for like, in fact, I recommend getting these, getting one, put it in your fridge. It lasts a year. And you can just use a little, it costs like $8. You can use a little bit, 1 gram at a time. This is literally a 100 batches of dough that I just made. It's more than that. Like I just made 500 grams of flour. So one of these, I could do this 100 times. That's like every 3 days I'm making dough and bread with this container. So it's $8. Even if you don't use it all before it expires, it's so nice to have in your fridge. And again, get your micro scale so you can dial in how much I'm using each time. I don't want to overdo it, right? Bread flour, Mike, what are you measuring with the scale? And if you are, and you're finding, and you're using 70% hydration, you're using 350 grams of water to 500 grams of flour. If you're following this recipe and you don't think your dough is airy enough, my thing would be, are you balling it up right? Like letting it ball up and letting it proof for 3 or 4 hours. Now I could technically try to stretch this out right now, and my pizza would be very, very dense because it hasn't had time for the air to expand. That final proof is really important. So I just be mindful after I make my dough balls, 3 or 4 hours, it's gotta like kind of rest itself and let those natural gases inside try to expand the dough. And that's what makes it light and airy. I hope that helps. I like Dave's Pizza Oven pizza as an example. Yes, he's got great, beautiful pizzas on, and I don't know what recipe he's using. It looks like a kind of like a New York style-ish pizza. He stretches it really thin. I'm guessing he dials in that final proof when he makes his pizzas. It's a really nice crust. These 250 gram dough balls will do exactly that. There is one more baking technique question. If I need to serve a large group, can I bake on the steel first on convection, on parchment, remove the parchment when it's partially cooked, and then broil? That way I can dress multiple pizzas in advance on parchment and not have to worry about sliding disasters. If so, what temperature and what level in the oven should I use? I have only one steel. Yes, so the question is essentially, I have a large group coming over and I don't want to be sitting in the kitchen as I'm making all the pizzas. Great question. And yes, I would pre-bake. That's really good. You could use parchment paper, sure. If you're not using the broiler, use parchment. Pre-bake all your crusts to about 70 or 80%, right? And then maybe even, yeah, just so it's set, right? And then we'll add our top. In fact, you could even bake your whole pizza at like 80% and then just reheat them. That's one option. Or two, you could just pre-bake your crusts and then top them as the guests arrive. Really depends on your wheelhouse, what you feel more comfortable doing. It's going to take some experimenting. If I was pre-baking, in fact, I've done this before. If I'm pre-baking before my guests arrive, I tend to like to make the entire pizza and bake it about 85%. And that's a feel, right? It takes practice to get what is 85% done. And then when my guests arrive, I can just take those pizzas and I can almost put 2 on a steel at a time. If I only have 1 steel on parchment, just to kind of reheat them. And there is some magic on that steel when you reheat these pizzas. It's going to almost give it like a second layer of crispiness. It's just going to take some practice to figure out how much is 80 or 90% done. What's that feel like to you? It takes a little practice. So if it's in other words, if it's a 7 or 8 minute bake, I might bake it for like 5 or 6, right? And then just 2 minutes to finish it as your guests arrive. Super fast, good way of doing it. I hope that helps. I typically collaborate with him. I wouldn't use parchment. Okay, cool. Mike, I'll have to check out your stuff, man. I'm sure we've talked on Instagram. And hit me up in direct messages so I can see what you're talking about, and we can kind of dive into that a little bit more. Without the broiler, what temp on convection? So if I'm not using the broiler, I'm baking at 500 Fahrenheit using convection. If my oven goes to 550, I can even use 550. With the broiler, again, I usually flash mine. If you want to use the broiler, you can just flash them afterwards to get a little color on top. Is 70% hydration your sweet spot? I have been experimenting with different ratios. I think I love 70%. I made a secret batch of dough for, I had to ship it overseas. I can't tell who it was, but it was one of the biggest celebrities I've ever, just huge. I was asked to make dough for a special event. And so I had to really dial in this dough. I overnighted it. I fermented it all weekend. I made it about 72% before I shipped. I can't say who it is. I wish I could. It was amazing. So I had to make I had the pressure on. I had to make dough for this huge celebrity. I just made like 6 doughs, and the recipe I used was this exact recipe. The only thing that I did was I added a little bit more water inside it. So I made, instead of 70, I went to 72, just to give it a little bit more airiness, like subtle. It was awesome. It turned out great too. I hope that helps. So yeah, but 70 is my wheelhouse. I reheated a high quality local pizza restaurant pizza that I had delivered on the steel recently for 5 minutes, and it came out phenomenal. Hey, Vicky. Yes. Reheating pizza on a baking steel is phenomenal. It almost makes it better, and it's hard to explain. It almost like it adds a second micro layer of crispiness on that bottom crust, and it's phenomenal. Totally agree. Which gets back to that earlier question about having a party and like baking your pizza at 80% and then reheating it as the guests arrive. It really does enhance the pizza. It's a really nice way of doing it. You guys, incredible questions today. I love it. These are great. Anybody else have any questions? If you do, just drop them here. And also just find me, Instagram, email me, andres@bakingsteel.com. You can find us at bakingsteel.com. Have you used sourdough starter before? Hey, what's up, Kent? Yes, we have, and we've got a recipe on there. I don't do it as often because I don't even have a starter in here. I haven't even had one in like a year and a half. I'm not baking as much currently. Yeah, I substitute in 20% of my starter into this 500 gram batch. So in other words, instead of 500 grams of flour, I'll use 400 grams of flour. Instead of 350 grams of water, I'll use 300 grams of water. And what I'll do is I'll put in 100 grams of starter, which will equal the 50 water, 50 flour. And that's my recipe for sourdough pizza. Can you go over freezing dough? Reheat at what temp? Good question. Probably, 450, I think, is a good temperature. If I'm reheating those pizzas later on, 450 to 500, it's just gonna be for a minute or two. So you just want it really hot, sear it really quick. Just get all the cheese again, really nicely melting and that crust hot, boom. It's awesome. What difference did I notice with the sourdough? I liked it. I can't say it was a huge difference. I really liked the flavor. It was a little bit more unique, a little bit more sourdough. And I don't make it for large groups. When I make pizza, I'm using yeast. It's just easier for me to dial in precisely what I'm doing. Now, there are experts that can make sourdough as efficiently as yeasted pizzas. It's just a matter of what your wheelhouse is. We should do more with sourdough. I probably will when I get completely set up here. But yeah, it's just a nuance. They're nice, super nice. I just prefer the yeast version. Let's see here. Can you go over the freezing dough? Great question. Let's say I'm freezing this dough. I've been fermenting it for 2 days. I just made my dough balls. Now is the time to freeze. So I'll take this dough ball, I'll use plastic wrap. I'll shrink it up really tight. Then I'll take a freezer bag, put the plastic wrapped dough inside my freezer bag, kind of like a double protection, and put those in my freezer. But I would freeze them right when I ball up my dough after it's fermented for 1, 2, or 3 days. That's the best time. Ferment it, ball it up, freeze. I hope that answers that. I like to blend flour. Any successful blendings, I use 80 to 90% bread flour and 10 to 20% whole wheat. I also like malt. Great question, Mike. That's a good combo. You know, it's funny. I made pizza for another guy. I made pizza for an Italian guy. Came into my old test kitchen, and there's a really special guest. He was Italian. He owned some wineries in Italy, and so he's been around. And I wanted to give him a really special treat. So we did dough, again, my little tweak, and I don't have like a go-to, but my tweak that time, what I was feeling was I did 95% bread flour and I added 5% organic spelt, which was really, really a small amount. So you're looking at like, what's that? 50 grams, right? Of, no, it's 10%, 50, 25 grams of spelt into my recipe of 500 grams of flour. So 25 of those were spelt. Gave it a really, just a tiny bit of nuttiness in that flavor, and it was phenomenal. Guy loved it. Said one of the best pizzas he's ever had. And I made a few of them that night. So in a home oven, unbelievable. Great experience. I hope so. Anyway, I guess my point, Mike, is just experiment. I like what you did there, 10 to 20% whole wheat. That's a good blend. Whole wheat tends to dry up if we use too much. So yeah, small micro amount like that. I wouldn't go heavier than 20, but 10 might be a nice trick too. And I've seen people use bread flour and 00 flour as a combination. I don't think I've tried that one yet, but I know of places that do, and it's actually very good. My thing is just kind of make something your own, make it like unique, just tweak it, like tweak our recipe. Our recipe is based on Jim Leahy's recipe, and it's identical, but the only thing we do differently is we ferment it longer. We use a different flour than he did, and we actually kneaded ours, but similar ratios, very similar. Regarding the pre-baking, is that just the dough or the dough and toppings? Hey, Pam, good question. You could do this both ways. You could pre-cook just the dough, and I know some people might do that and then they freeze it. I would, if I'm having guests, I would make my entire pizza. I would just get all that. If that's the plan, if I'm making pizza for guests and it's not like a pizza party where everyone's kind of doing their own thing, I would take and make my pizzas in advance. I would do this too, and I've done this if I have like 10 or 15 people coming over. I always like to feed the kids first. So I might make the kids pizzas ahead of time. Make 3 or 4 just cheese pizzas, maybe just cheese and pepperoni. Bake them at 80 to 85%. They'll be done. Get all your other work done. So when the kids get there, they don't want to sit around and talk. They want to eat. So we know this. So we take those pizzas, we bake them up as soon as they get in there, and then we're feeding them 10 minutes after they arrive. They're happy campers. And if the kids are happy campers, then the adults are happy campers, and everyone wins. I hope that answers that. You got it, Mike. And yeah, Mike, hit me up too on Instagram. We'll talk further. You're great. Thank you, Giovanna. Thank you. You guys are amazing. Can I dress the pizza on a crisper pan and place the pan on the steel? Absolutely. Everything is better on the steel. So if I'm making like bar pizza, for example, if I'm making pies, if I'm making cookies on a sheet tray, and I'm roasting vegetables, put that on your steel, whatever temperature it is. If I'm baking cookies at 350, my cookies are going to cook super evenly because I've got the steel beneath at 350. corner to corner, make every cookie better and much more evenly cooked. Same thing with pies and everything else. Thoughts on cooked sauce versus fresh sauce? I typically use freshly made sauce. Great question. It's interesting. I prefer tomatoes. Like tomatoes, I've got a couple of different versions here. These are both crushed. I think they're both. No, these are whole peeled, Bianco di Napoli's. These are crushed. In fact, I was going to do a taste test. You can open these cans up and taste them right out of the can before you do anything. Before you add salt, just taste the tomatoes. You'll be amazed at the flavor in the tomatoes and the differences in tomatoes by just tasting them raw. And then I might add a little salt. But typically, if I love the taste of the raw tomato, I'm going to like them on the pizza. Now, I don't cook my sauce. I cook my tomato sauce, but I don't cook my pizza sauce. When I bite into pizza, I want to taste the fresh tomatoes. So all we're doing in the oven is just heating up these tomatoes for 4, 5, 6 minutes on the baking steel, on the pizza dough. We're heating up the tomatoes so the taste is going to be just a little bit more vibrant, I think, when it's heated up than when it's raw. I don't think there's any major chemical changes going on there, but I think the taste of, I've done taste tests before I've cooked them, and typically the tomatoes that taste the best are the ones that taste the best on the pizza. Almost 9 out of 10 times, probably 10 out of 10 times. So you got to like them here first, and then you'll love them on the pizza with the cheese. Awesome. Hi, Rita. So these are the Bianco di Napoli's, and these are Bio Nature. I got these at Whole Foods. These are crushed tomatoes from Italy. I was just trying them out. I haven't even tried them yet. Curious what they taste like. These are good. These are good. But again, tomatoes change all the time. So this can from 2 years ago isn't going to be the same can as today, because it's a whole new growing season. It's a whole new, atmosphere. Everything's changed. So my recommendation is don't get too hooked up on one can. Continuously taste and experiment and see which ones you like best. And the seasons are different in Italy than they are in the US. So again, taste, experiment, read reviews on them too. But just because someone else loves them, they may be tasting tomatoes from 2 years ago versus like this year, they might be different. So again, typically good brands are always going to be pretty consistent in their tomatoes, but you never know. Taste. If you're balling your dough and it tears, is there anything you need to do or restart the balling of the dough? Good question. If I'm making my dough balls and I rip it and tear it, just continue doing it. Just be more gentle. The tears are going to kind of repair themselves. It's not going to be the end of the world. It's not going to kill anything. Just be mindful of it. And I've gone through batches. If I'm stressed out, if I'm doing like 10 dough balls and I'm thinking about something that's making me like maybe tense, I rip the dough. If I find myself in a good place, like if I'm chill and I'm having good, happy thoughts, my dough is going to come out much better because I'm not stressed. Again, it's mindfulness. It's not just like, this isn't a stress ball. I'm going to be like talking about, shooting 105 in golf or something. I'm like, oh, I missed those putts or whatever it might be, or my kids getting into trouble at school, whatever it might be. I might get really stressed and start to press into this dough too much. Just be mindful and you won't rip these. That's all. And if it starts to rip again, more flour in your hands, just be gentle and kind. You'll see a difference. For a thin crust, what is my technique? Great question. Thin crust. I am going to take, this is 150 grams. I'm sorry, this is 250. I will use 150. Same technique. I'll ball it up again, and then I'll let it rest for 2 hours. I don't need to it doesn't need to rest as long because I'm taking a rolling pin. I'm going to squish the living daylights out of it. I find 150 to be a nice, gives you like an 1/8 of an inch thickness. I can roll it out to a 10-inch pie. That's a good number for me, 150-ish for grams. I hope that makes sense. And then again, once I let it final proof, I roll it out super thin, micro thin. I hope that answers that. Bread loaf on steel question. At what point do you raise the dough above the steel with the rings? Great question, Alex. If I'm making bread and I want to get it really nice and dark, I use these baking steel bracelets. I've always got them on, and these are silicone. These are awesome. Silicone. I will put my let's see here. I'll put my dough like right on top of my bands, and sometimes it might require two if I have a bigger loaf, right? And what that allows is my my bread not to get too dark when it's baking at the end. So for me, it's like the last 5 or 10 minutes, I'll use the rings. I don't even always use them. However, if I want to get a really nice crusty loaf, I'll put a couple of rings down and bake it for like the last 5 or 10 minutes. If it's a 30-minute bake, like the last 10 on the rings, just to help prevent it from getting too dark on the bottom. The steel can do that sometimes. Hey, Ken, our Instagram is at Baking Steel. At Baking Steel, you can find us, and we'll put that in the follow-up email too, just so you guys know. You guys are great. I hope that answers all of that. Again, hit us up. Thank you guys. Great questions today. Amazing. And we'll do these again. We're going to slow down a bit because it's getting into the really busy season. So we might just do another dough or 2 pizza hangouts, dough hangouts the next, like in November and December. I know everyone's busy. In the meantime, any questions, hit me up. And you guys are amazing. Thank you. Grateful for every single one of you and for being here with you. Thank you, guys. Incredible. Super. See you soon. Okay.